we are seeing around the globe is not really encouraging for many national government. Finally, on the AU, the African Union must take the lead. The African Union must be independent, and I think as it is, we should have a mechanism for I can say punishment in a layman language of member states who are not committing to what they have signed, agreement, deals, and also looking at those who are yet to localize some of this initiative at the national level when we're talking about this. We can't just continue to have this as a conversation. We can't just continue to have it as a meeting and commitment where we would stand with our leaders to make this commitment, but back home or back in the countries, then nothing is happening. So for me, I think we need to have this few strategies in place and see how we position young people at the center of all the initiative. Thank you very much.
Over to you.
Thank you very much, Akwesi, and good evening to friends and colleagues. To delve right into the question and to try and answer the question that you have posed, I think the central principle of the CFTA is inclusive trade, and I underline inclusivity between countries. And if we commence from that premise, it could be argued that inclusive trade cannot be achieved with the current state of peace and security on the continent. And I offer this argument based on three evidence. The first is that if one looks at the data, you find that there is a strong correlation between the volume of trade and peace in African countries. So with the exception of countries rich in natural resources like DRC and Nigeria, no African country which scored high in the fragile state index is listed currently as the highest, as amongst the highest exporters on the continent. Rather, what we see are countries like South Africa, Ghana, and Morocco that have consistently scored relatively low on the fragile state index as recording high level of diverse exports. And that is also an important point to highlight, the diversity of exports beyond natural resources. The second evidence is that countries which score or countries with significant ratio of trade to GDP will be significantly impacted by insecurity on the continent. And why do I say this? Over the last 5 years, macro trends seem to suggest to us that there is a rise in the percentage of trade to GDP by almost 60% collectively as a continent. So what this means is that African countries that rely on trade to enhance their economic performance would have a challenge once there's an alteration of the security environment, especially when there is a crisis. And there is no better empirical data about this argument if you take the third point I intend to emphasize, and that's the COVID pandemic. What does the COVID crisis tells us about trade on the continent? What we have seen through COVID is that we have been exposed, it has exposed how there has been a negative impact on global and regional trade, due largely to travel restrictions, broken supply chains, and reduction and disruption, in fact, of domestic agricultural production. And if one looks at the recent report that was published by the African Union Economic Affairs Department, what we find, based on the socioeconomic impact of COVID in Africa, is a contrasted growth by up to minus 4.9%. And of course, we do know from repeated reports on the impact of COVID that the continent is likely to face its first recession in 25 years. One aspect that we have seen a significant effect of the COVID crisis is around food security. And we are seeing that this has also been exacerbated because of trade blockages. So in conclusion, what I intend to emphasize here is that if we are looking at inclusive trade, the possibility of inclusivity in trade through the CFTA would certainly contribute to sustainable peace. But also inversely, peace would facilitate inclusive trade. So there is this very mutually reinforcing relationship between sustainable peace and inclusive trade. It's a win-win for both variables, and I look forward to efforts to promote this mutually reinforcing relationship. Over to you, Akwasi.
Thank you very much. We have some time constraints, unfortunately, but we'll see how it goes if there will be time for Q&A. The second question, and let me emphasize, it's really about solutions. We've done fantastic diagnosis of the disease. Now we move to the solutions. And the solutions question has to do with, in your experience, what are the 1, 2, or 3 maximum 3 best practices that you can highlight for this audience? Best practices. What are some of the best practices that you think can contribute to the peace we need for a successful implementation of the free trade area agreement? Best practices. Straight to the point, 1 or 2 or 3. Thank you. We'll start again with Yemi. Yemi, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be very brief and focus on one very important normative development, which LPI has been part of directly. And this is the groundbreaking IGAD policy framework for informal cross-border trade and cross-border security governance, which was adopted in 2018. Applying a collaborative policy analysis and engagement approach, a joint initiative between IGAD's early warning mechanism and response mechanism, CWARN, the Inter-Africa Group, and the Organization for Social Research in Eastern and Southern Africa. LPI began this process in 2014. So essentially, the CPA initiative, after a process of evidence gathering and consultations with multiple stakeholders, culminated in the development of a policy framework document on the informal cross-border trade and cross-border security governance nexus in the IGAD region. So the wide range of threats to human security and borderlanders in the Horn of Africa suggests that addressing security and socioeconomic gaps requires cross-cutting interventions across multiple issues. So in this regard, for time's sake, ICBT, informal cross-border trade, and the security governance nexus focus on the IGAD policy framework, then bridges multiple hard as well as soft security concerns and addresses the peace and development nexus, which is critical to the borderlands in the IGAD region. So the IGAD policy framework is critical for the following reasons. The adoption of the policy framework represents a critical achievement in the process to advance regional integration and cooperation in the IGAD region. It would also assist IGAD member states governments to tackle the multifaceted socioeconomic and security challenges in the borderlands of the Horn. And the policy framework contains policy recommendations and implementation mechanisms regarding border management and security that would facilitate more effective collaboration between the member states, as well as in protecting their borders. The implementation of the policy recommendations will also immensely strengthen the socioeconomic resilience and economic empowerment of the most marginalized groups in the borderlands, as has been mentioned previously, such as women, youth, and people with disabilities, through employment creation and facilitation of their participation in informal cross-border trade. And finally, as a direct contribution to the ACFTA, the policy framework also represents a critical milestone in achieving the vision which is enshrined in the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. The policy recommendations in the IGAD framework will create synergies between the regional community, economic community, and the ACFTA, and it will facilitate, if implemented in a timely manner and inclusively, it will facilitate the implementation of the provisions of the ACFTA in the IGAD region, and moreover, tackle the blind spots regarding informal cross-border trade in the provisions of the ACFTA. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move on now to Rahima. And Rahima, what are the few, 1, 2, or 3 best practices from your experience? Thank you. Over to you.
Kwasi. I think in terms of best practices, there is perhaps one project that I can give an example. And as a reminder, I head up a relatively small NGO based out of the province of Ituri in the northeast of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we work also in the province of North Kivu. I mentioned earlier the obstacle of the informality of markets or sectors within the continent. In the DRC, mining, both large-scale as well as small-scale mining, has been considered as a contributor to conflict as well as the underdevelopment of the country. And I think when you look at the Democratic Republic of Congo, specifically Ituri, where we work, gold is the mineral that is seen as fueling the ongoing conflict, almost endemic conflict between communities in that particular region. And so the question we asked ourselves around 7 to 8 years ago was, how do we turn gold from being a conflict or war mineral into a peace mineral? And as part of answering that question, we partnered up with Peace Direct as well as the GHR Foundation, and came up with a project that we called Peace Gold. Essentially, the project, as part of the project, we're working with supporting 2 artisanal mining cooperatives to produce gold in the territory of Njugu, still in the province of Ituri, in an ethical as well as environmentally friendly way, as a way to consolidate peace, to protect the environment, and to generate sustainable income. And I must note here that most of the members of the cooperatives are ex-combatants who mostly are also young in terms of the youth bulge I'd mentioned earlier. And so this project essentially is looking at ways to build trust between communities within war-affected parts of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And as part of the implementation of this particular project, we've realized and recognized the importance of multi-sectoral approaches to conflict resolution and conflict management. And by that, I mean the marrying peace building with economic development. And as part of that process, the impact has been absolutely amazing to see the fact that over the last 3 years, when conflict has been rife in the area, killings have been rife. In fact, since March of this year to around June, there are almost 200,000 displaced people within the area. But the two communities where we work were almost untouched because of the community and social cohesion that was created as part of the peace committee that was created by members of the cooperatives. And so I think in terms of the best practice here, I would definitely recommend and before even recommending, I think the next phase of the project is looking at, which is in alignment with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, is looking at how we can connect those cooperatives to an international legal export platform. And I think that's where the FTA comes in. How can gold, conflict-free gold, coming out of the Democratic Republic of Congo, specifically the province of Ituri, be traded or even sold in other countries, such as neighboring countries, such as Uganda, Rwanda, or even, internationally, from this upstream production that we've created with the cooperatives to really create a supply chain that is, integrated and also focuses on the stability of the Democratic Republic of Congo by focusing on the exporting of conflict-free gold. I think the recommendation here really, in terms of best practice, would be to look at ways of supporting grassroots efforts. I think it's great that we're having this conversation here in Addis, but there are plenty of organizations doing absolutely amazing work on the ground that are more than capable of really helping to communicate this agreement to the grassroots. Because I think in most cases, as we've heard quite often here, is the fact that this agreement will need to really be communicated widely for it to really be accepted and appropriated by the African population, and mainly the large portion of the population made up mainly of young people and women in the informal sector. So that would be the recommendation of supporting grassroots organizations that have the capacity of promoting this agreement and facilitating the successful implementation of the agreement throughout the continent. And of course, I'm speaking of the Democratic Republic of Congo, fully knowing that it's a country that has signed on to the agreement, but that has not yet ratified the agreement. But it's a country that is way too important for this continent, right in the middle of the continent, to be ignored. Thank you.
Desiree, let's go. We are running out of time. We are almost over now. Please, Desiree. And then after that, we have Fatima and Jide. I hope the rest of you will have a chance to speak as well. Desiree, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. So straight to my key idea in terms of best practice. Number one, I think we need to structurally reduce extreme inequality. Many ideas of activity out there. These will automatically catalyze the reduction of extreme poverty. There are so many studies, and the latest I have seen was from the Institute for Security Study that show that the number one reason for young peoples in Africa to be easily enrolled by extremist group is not religion, it's not fundamentalism, it is poverty. So we should not wait for the Continental Free Trade Agreement to fix that. We need to pave the way for the free agreement to give us potential, basically, to take care of that young population. If we succeed at this level of having a real pro-poor mechanism, even the gain from the implementation of the CFTA will be more fairly shared within African people. Number two, people have rights, people have power, and we should continue promoting active citizenship. But while doing that, it is important that people know better how these rights and power can be and should be exercised. Now I'm referring to peace education, human rights education, civic education. There's plenty of work to do to make that happen. This should be part of the chain of actions, especially at local level, when I'm looking at organizations that are operating at really local level. Number three, the third and the last one, is about management of diversity. And this is one of the sensitive issues within our continent. If we manage better diversity in the continent, Africa will have avoided important conflict that we are experiencing now. The rule of the majority should be always mixed and balanced by progressive and innovative policy on diversity management. And again, every area, every region, or every country, should have a kind of customized strategy to do so. Those are the three things I would like to put on the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We move on now to Fatima.
Yes, so quickly, I have 3 points from here too. And one, I would want to say developing, strengthening, and adoption of a harmonized legal framework, policies for control, clearances, and also, most importantly, looking at how we can close the gaps of corruption in terms of services, especially when it comes to cross-border negotiations and entry points, especially at ports of delivery. But then also moving to second, which is clearly tying up with the first point, is also if we are able to create a form of coordination, synergy, and harmonize some of our custom protocols and services, especially when it comes to improving our communication and coordination, but then also have links between Ministry of Trade and Investments and Finances to be able to communicate clearly and highlight some of the issues within countries. And that would improve a great deal in how we're able to come up to simplify these processes. But then also, on a third note, we should improve partnerships with private companies, private investments, but then also private service providers. This is also, in essence, to simplify some of those processes, because as long as the government continue to maintain rigidity and non-flexibility between them and the private investors, private sectors, then it continues to be very difficult to achieve the AFCFTA, because then we are shrinking the spaces also for individual contributions, but then also platforms that would simplify this movement back and forth. So with these 3 points, I stop from here. Over to you, Papasi.
Thank you so much. Now, last one is Jide.
Thank you, Akwasi. This is the time to celebrate my organization, and I have 3 points, just like Desiree and Fatima. The first, in terms of best practice, is how UNDP, through the work we're doing on stabilization in the Lake Chad Basin region, is opening up trade corridors. For some that may know, in 2019, the UNDP launched a $100 million stabilization facility in the Lake Chad. And we are currently implementing stabilization programs in Northeast Nigeria, Niger, Cameroon, and Chad. And stabilization for us requires that we work with security forces, but also political actors to provide security, provide basic infrastructure, and restore livelihood opportunities. And it's against that backdrop that we are opening up trade corridors, and the latest of which is in Limani and Amishide, and this is between the border of Cameroon and Nigeria. We see that this is very important to facilitate cross-border trade between both countries. The second best practice is UNDP's recent attempt to establish an African Borderland Center, which is to facilitate trade. I think Yemi made that point, especially across the borderland areas. And amongst some of the most vulnerable population, especially women. And I think one of the speakers mentioned that evidence seems to suggest that women account for 70% of informal cross-border trade in Africa. And so the CFTA provides an opportunity for women to operate through formal channels. And we believe that through the Borderland Center that we have established in Nairobi, we are able to facilitate and support women through better analysis, policy advice, and programmatic interventions. For those that may want to learn more about this, I'm open to further bilateral conversations. The last point, given the want for time, is partnership. Partnership would be key in realizing the CFTA. And it's against that realization, of course, that we are beginning to forge partnership with the CFTA Secretariat, where we'll be supporting the CFTA Secretariat in Accra with technical support on trade in goods, thought leadership, especially in the area of developing a CFTA analytical index, and finally, in relation to capacity building of SMEs led by women and youth. Again, I'm happy to have an offline conversation on any of these areas that may be of interest to participants. Over to you.
Thank you very much. We have less than 1 minute left. I would like to hear from the Tana colleagues, whether we can go another 15 minutes so that we deal with some questions. So please let me know. I don't know how you communicate that to me, but please let us know. Anyway, our time is up. There's one question on the...
Dr. Akwesi.
Yes, go ahead.
Communication from Brian saying that we can go up to 6:30 Addis Ababa time.
Akwasi, this is Brian.
Yes, hi, Brian. Go ahead.
You are supposed to end at 18:30 our time. My watch suggests that you have 30 minutes.
All right.
But if there is any particular reason why you want to end 30 minutes early, it is really up to you.
It's not that I want to end.
Could take anything from 15 to 30 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Please?
Brian, it's not clearly. It's not that I want to end early. We received a series of agendas, all types of revisions from Tana, and that said 1 hour. You can check with them and you see what I mean. So anyway, we have 30 minutes. That's good news. It's not what was stated on the agenda for us. One question that's been posed is, I'll read it out very quickly. Thank you, speakers, for being candid. Can what has not worked in sub-regional blocks work at the regional level, that's the continental level? Then there's a statement after that, which I assume is an elaboration of that question, which is, instability has been the stumbling block in realizing integration. For example, in the East African community, some member states are not willing to embrace free movement of goods and services due to some member states being unstable. So the question really is, can it work at the continental level even when it doesn't work at the sub-regional level? Who would like to take it up? Okay, I'll call on Desiree and Jide and Fatima, and then the next question I'll call on Yemi and Rehima. So Desiree, do you have any response to that?
Thank you, Dr. Akwesi. From what we have seen in the regional integration process from the very beginning until where we are now, where there are only a few things to show to African people, important to mention that if it did not work at regional level, it will have hard time to work at continental level. That's why it is important for the implementation of the Continental Free Trade Agreement to build every action and strategy on the close collaborations with the regional economic community. That is important. Luckily, I think I was reading one of the comments from a participant today that there is an ongoing process for the RECs to convene together with the African Union to see how they can work together on that. Even though we say it does not work in the REC level, there are situations in some REC, especially ECOWAS, where we have some good best stories to show to people, where there have been a few positive actions in terms of free movement, free trade, integration, and so forth. And I think the whole continent can build on some of them. I'm sure there are some examples at other REX level as well. So, but it's fundamental, not to deceive ourselves to say that, oh, it didn't work at REC level, it worked at continental level. I think that won't happen. Rather, let's look at what worked in a few areas at regional level, build a strong relationship and cooperation with the RECs, and build on that, to let the AFCTA go ahead.
Rahima. So Fatima, any?
For me, I would like to believe that it is not impossible for that to work at a continental level, even if it failed to work at a regional level. And to me, strongly, this is because I think some synergies and relationships between countries that might exist at continental level have a little bit of a strong commitment and perhaps a level of understanding than sometimes when you're talking about the sub-regional groups. And for instance, this is also sometimes initially an for a project when we are implementing a project. I am from the northeast Nigeria and the Lake Chad region, and then how we have a language barrier between some of the Lake Chad countries that are francophone and a few of us that are anglophone, especially Nigeria being at the center. It makes it sometimes very difficult to have this close relationship, close intimate conversations because of these barriers. And then looking at that, it makes it a little bit uncomfortable for both parties or for both countries to flow very well. And to this, I think perhaps if we push also from the continental level, which can also pave ways and avenues for interaction and for entries to other countries across the Africa, this might be a starting point. It could be where we drive the examples from. It could be where we drive the best practices of what works from. So it is not impossible, but of course we believe that it is highly likely to work at regional level, a sub-regional level, because of this closure and this closeness than when we're talking of a whole continent.
Like we're doing well with time now. So I will suggest that Yemi and Rehima also address the same question before we move on to the next. But first, Jide.
Thank you very much, Kwasi. I think if one goes back to, say, the Monrovian summit, I think of 1979, and of course the Lagos Plan of Action in 1980, you would see that between then and now, we probably have evolved over 3 phases, or at least 3 to 5 phases of economic integration in Africa. So rather than phrase the question as whether sub-regional integration did not work. I would rather frame it differently by suggesting that we need to look at some of the lessons from attempts at sub-regional level to promote economic integration. And when you look at those lessons, I think there is a lot from that can help us establish our continental ambition. Previous attempts were largely driven by politics as opposed to economics and strong legal framework. But what we find with the CFTA is an embodiment of an integration process that is deeply rooted on sound economic integration. And I think as a first step, we are looking at a process of a continental customs union that would eventually incrementally lead to a regional customs union. So I think from all of that experiences, there is so much to be optimistic about. Yes, it is not all going to be full of achievements. There might be challenges along the way, but I do believe that we have a rich tapestry of lessons to build upon as we seek to realize our continental ambition. Over to you.
Yemi, do you have anything? I'm sure you do. Please, go ahead.
Akwasi, actually, I was preparing to respond to the second question because the previous speakers have addressed the main points. But again, I think the issue around acknowledging the different security contexts and I guess progress that we see in the regions, in the different regions in Africa is very important. I think we cannot afford to lump together all the regions and have that one size fits all approach. I think it's very contextual, and I think understanding the geopolitics and the the different phases and transitions that we are dealing with in different regions in Africa has to be appreciated, and we also have to build on the progress that we have made. I think it's also about acknowledging a tremendous amount of progress that has been made in in the process to regional integration and in norm setting in Africa. And I think perhaps in the coming decade, where we need to focus more on the implementation aspect of it and support the continental institution, which has the convening power, the political power, and be able to support it. Thank you.
Maintenant, mon patron Rahima.
Yes, so I think my colleagues have addressed this question really well and covered most of what I would have added as well. But I think in terms of just adding another point really would just be the fact that despite what the person who has written the question has referred to as a failure, I think I would support Yemi in saying that we really need to build up on what was achieved as part of those regional organizations in terms of what lessons we can really pick up and move forward with for this continental agreement. What is positive here, however, is the widely accepted as well as supported agreement and the political will, which at the moment seems to be very high in terms of really pushing for the successful implementation of this agreement. And for that, I think the necessary mechanisms have to be put in place as a result of analyzing the lessons picked up from the previous from what exists currently in terms at the regional level, and to really look at how this agreement can really bolster Africa's economic progress and development, because there's definitely a lot of potential. There's definitely more pros than cons in terms of this agreement. And it definitely is most likely to be a stimulus package that we need at this particular moment in terms of the pandemic that currently we're facing throughout the world, especially here in Africa. So I think it's definitely an agreement that needs to be supported. And most importantly, we really have to focus on implementing this successfully, as opposed to just leaving it as an agreement that we can look at in the next few years and add it to the list of other agreements that were very well written and supported, but were never successfully implemented. Thank you.
We have 2 additional questions, so we're going to have to figure out how we handle that. The first one is, in terms of conflict and stability, how do the speakers see the issue of geopolitical cyber threats to Africa in terms of destabilizing the African cyberspace and consequently economic stability? So it's about cybersecurity. What are your thoughts on that? We don't have enough time to go around the table, so anybody who can, please jump in quickly. Okay, I'm going to randomly call on you to jump in. Random, Jide, any ideas on that cybersecurity?
Thank you very much. This is an area that is emerging on the continent. We know that it represents a threat. There's a lot of misinformation, narratives and counter narratives, and this could not only undermine peace and security, but it could also undermine our effort to promote economic integration. And we are already seeing this from, recent crises, like what is happening currently in Nigeria, where there's so much misinformation that is fueling violence. But what I think is important is what do we do about it? And this is where there is a need to have a collective continental conversation. As currently constituted, what we find is that Africa has not necessarily developed its own model on how to engage in the area of the 4th industrial revolution. And for us to be able to address cybersecurity, I think the starting point would be, how is it that African states and non-state actors are able to embrace the 4th industrial revolution in a way that is responsible? And responsibility is at the heart of the 4th industrial revolution. And for that to happen, there are a number of things that we need to begin to think about. If you ask an average politician what it means to have to develop algorithms on a particular issue, they might have very limited knowledge. If you ask a judge on what it means to pass legislation or to pass a judgment relating to issues relating to cybersecurity, we probably would be lacking in that regard. So what I think is important for us to begin to think about is this idea of, building capacity or learning around what it means to embrace the 4th industrial revolution. I think when states and institutions that constitute the state are able to build capacity in this area, it would then become possible for us to engage in a conversation on how we curb cybersecurity threats on the continent. This is an emerging security challenge that requires deep analysis, and I do believe that there is an opportunity for us to do that. At the UNDP, we have already started a thinking around this, and we are looking to develop a playbook for states that would allow them build capacity around how to embrace the 4th industrial revolution. And a subcomponent of that would be how to address, of course, the issue of cybersecurity threats. Over to you, Kwesi.
That's also very, very important, and several questions are coming up. This question is, I would like to raise an issue to the panelists on local practices that can maintain peace and how important local peace builders are, who are the ones who know their situations, who are trusted, and who will be there for long-term sustainability. How can they be fully recognized and have the power and agency to do what is needed to achieve the kind of peace on the ground that will allow the free trade agreement to function? In a nutshell, it's about the agency. The question is about the agency, what you think of the agency of local peace builders. Let me call on Yemi, and then we'll go to Rehima and Desiree. Yemi.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think this is a very important question, not only in the normal day-to-day life, but also in this new normal, COVID and post-COVID world that we live in, which puts an imperative on local actors, both in humanitarian settings as well as peace-building work, requiring timely and efficient response. So local responders, local actors, being able to address security context as well as humanitarian context, and providing that local knowledge, information, and analysis, which oftentimes goes unrecognized. So I appreciate the question in this case, to try and highlight not only the importance, but how to ensure that this is structurally addressed. And the lack of perhaps focus from policymakers or donors, and questioning perhaps the effectiveness of local peace building. I think the experiences, the results that we see, part of my presentation was trying to highlight how working closely with the local actors who reside in the border areas, in our case, who have local knowledge, and applying an inclusive approach can lead to successful development of policy. By that I mean local actors being able to generate critical information, as what we, I guess, would label as evidence, to be able to direct and ensure that the right kind of response is tailored. So I think there's a huge investment that is required to continue to strengthen the capacity, being able to provide and ensure that space is reserved for that type of information and voice coming from those who have the lived experience, and acknowledging that local practices may also need to be properly documented, analyzed, and be part of the mainstream discourse. So there's respect in the local voice, experience, and input, and there's a much needed investment in terms of capacity strengthening that can be directed. And organizations such as mine, LPI, works primarily to try and highlight this type of value. And I appreciate this question because it's a very important conversation to have in our continental discourse.
Thank you. Thank you. And Rehima, this is a question I'm sure you will have a lot to say about, given your amazing work at the local level. So Rehima, over to you. A few minutes.
Thank you, Akwasi. I think, yes, it is a question that almost feels like it's directed to us and our organization. Of course, touches on the work that we do as a local peace-building organization. The question absolutely has its place and is extremely vital, because local peace builders, especially in this discussion around peace and security on the continent, cannot be ignored. In fact, we need to actually zoom in on the work that local peace builders are doing in terms of the different approaches that they're using within different contexts on the on the continent. There's of course an interesting discourse on the role of international players in terms of stabilization, and at the moment it feels as though in most cases it's always international versus local. What do international players bring to the discussion in terms of bringing about stabilization and peace, and what role do local organizations and local peace builders play? And I think it's actually a discussion that needs to be extended beyond just platforms such as this. Locally, for example, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where we work, there's a lot that international players such as the UN's stabilization mission, MONUSCO, brings to the table. However, there are a lot of other peace-building approaches that they just cannot do on their own and need local organizations such as ours and others on the ground that are doing absolutely amazing work in terms of the relationship and the trust that they have built with grassroots communities. And it really requires collaboration and ongoing collaboration between international players and local peace builders. But I think it's one that's, as I mentioned earlier, especially around promoting this agreement to the grassroots. There's a lot of work that's going to be needed in terms of really communicating the importance of this agreement and how much it's going to bolster and really fast-track the development of our continent if it is successfully implemented, and the role that the grassroots community can play. And by grassroots communities, it goes from those who are currently in the informal sector working in conflict-inflicted contexts, or even those that are not necessarily in conflict-inflicted contexts, but still need to hear more on this agreement and how much this agreement can contribute to the development of the economies. And so the question is an absolutely essential question, and I think it's one that really needs to be further discussed beyond the few minutes that we have here. Right. But it's one that's, as I mentioned earlier, grassroots communities and grassroots organizations really need to be supported to really assist in bringing about stability in order to facilitate integration.
Thank you. We need to move on. We have less than 3 minutes, less than 4 minutes to go. There is a final question, and I would hand it over to Desiree, Fatima, and Jide to wrap it up. The question is, on cybersecurity, cyberspace is emerging as the fifth domain of war. Some countries are establishing cyber armies for defensive purposes, as well as stockpile cyber weapons. The question is, how are African countries prepared to protect their cyberspace, and what is the position of the African Union on this? We start with you, Desiree. 1 minute, another minute, Fatima, and another minute, Jide.
Thank you, Dr. Kwasi. I think this is a real concern. And for us to protect our cyberspace, we first have to have one. I don't think we do. If you remember a few years back, an IT technician at the African Union Commission came in the office in the morning. He realized that every night, information from all computers of the EU commissions are being sent to Beijing in China. So that was revealed by a French journal called Le Monde. And I have, you remember everything that happened around that. It was not resolved. We don't know where we are in that. So just to mention and reiterate that the threats on cyber attack are very serious and may basically weaken our move and integration, including the AFCTA.
Jide.
Thank you. I think it might be, I really don't know what the AU position on this is, but cyber sovereignty on the continent, it remains debatable. And simply because you have cyber sovereignty has to be looked at within the context of, the global competition for Africa as well. So you would see some of the big players globally also competing for influence. And one of the ways of doing that on the continent simply is through the cyberspace. But what I think is important is that as we begin to think about preparing ourselves for the threat of the future, or what is beginning to be the threat of today, we need to understand, and this is the point around analysis, how do we equip our governments, how do we equip civil society and citizens to better understand what the cyberspace represents. And I think from such an understanding, we can begin to identify entry points through which we can impose defense or defensive mechanisms against, potential threats towards the continent. Over.
Two things I want to say and we'll wrap up. The first is a big thank you to Tana. Tana, you are the light in all of this darkness on our continent. Thank you, and we will continue to stand by you, and those of us in funding organizations like Humanity United would advocate for financial support to the Tana Secretariat and Tana events. Thank you very much. The second point, final point, is next steps. And the next steps are, one, we hope there'll be some recording or some documentation of all of this to share with everyone. And two, that we will all stay in touch somehow. So thank you again and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Akwasi. Thank you, Desiree. Thank you, Fatima. Thank you, Rehima. Thank you, Jide. And thank you, Yemi. It's been a phenomenal panel to close our fifth day. Great insights, practical suggestions, as well as cautions. Colleagues, it's been a long day. It remains for me to thank those of you who have stayed with us throughout the day. We will see you tomorrow. You all look hungry, so I will not share any story at this moment, but we will see you tomorrow, and it is our last day. And tomorrow we can reflect on some of the great things that have happened this week. Take care. Enjoy Addis Ababa. Enjoy resting or working. See you again in the same place tomorrow. So tomorrow, just for the sake of clarity, we will start at 13:45. 13:45 to 14:45, we will have voices from Tana. And then at 3 p.m., from 3 p.m. to 16:30, we will have the discussion, making the AFCFTA work. And then from 16:45 to 17:40, we will have the closing ceremony of Dana. We should be done just before 6 p.m. tomorrow for those who have flights or other business to take care of. Take care. See you tomorrow. Well done.